like innovation if they like depending on most of it does. What we talk about is bringing innovation in the company. And likewise, startups. Startups are easy because they don't have credibility cash or customers. So you take the guys who've got credibility cash and customers with the guys who've got the smart ideas and entrepreneurship, put them together, and what happens?
Everyone wins. Success.
That's our aim. So we have monthly dinners. We've now got an alliance with the IET.
Yeah.
Could I ask you to take your seats again, ladies and gentlemen?
I love the innovative space.
Well, we should get onto our database and invite you to. Well, the next event is what we're calling our virtual.
Ringmaster motivation. I love that.
And this is our virtually real Christmas, which is literally our You'll be there.
I asked somebody else already. I'm like, maybe I don't trust your copy.
We're going to go back to
standards.
Take your seats again, ladies and gentlemen.
What's that? We're going to go back now.
The final of our speakers today is Paul Evans, the General Manager of the Air Warfare Destroyer Alliance, the first surface shipbuilding mega project to be held at the Osborne site of, I should call it ANI now, or the asset manager of ASC Proprietary. This is Paul's birthday, so we should. 21 again. And I'm lucky enough to be doing some work as a contractor down at AWD at the moment, and I personally have witnessed how brilliantly the third of the three ships has come through its sea trials. So I can't wait to hear Paul tell us more about the project.
Thanks, John, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to everybody today. I think it's just as well he asked us this year rather than next year, because as an organisation, we're going to be done by this time next year, well and truly. So it's a good stage of the program to be able to talk to you and go through some of the history, some of the issues, some of the difficulties, and where we've ended up as a program, as a team, and delivering a capability to the Navy, which at the end of the day is what we're all about. It was also good listening to Chris and Rohan talk about where the shipyard and shipbuilding technology and innovation is going for the future. Our program started back in, well, it was dreamt up back in the early 2000s. It went to decision in 2006 and a contract in 2007. And I can tell you there weren't too many people around any committee tables talking about digital twins back then. Possibly talking about 3D models, but really back at that stage, which isn't that long ago, we were really talking about as-built designs on paper, transported from the other side of the world and built over here. So it was a different dynamic. We had some opportunities going through that to shape it, but I think one of the strong advantages of the continuous shipbuilding approach that the government has launched is the ability for companies like BAE to invest in the technology and understand that is going to be in place for a considerable period of time, and they'll get a good return on that investment. If you're running a program over 6, 9, 10 years, and you go to the CFO's office and say, look, I've got this really good idea to completely change our supply chain system, you might not have a very long discussion, because the return on investment just isn't really long enough to get into those sort of programs. Also, a program like AWD that's bringing a lot of companies together needs to understand how all of that procurement, supply, and the construction's happening in a cohesive sort of sense. So I think the continuous shipbuilding that we're going to see going forward has a lot of advantages and will certainly realise a lot of efficiencies. So when John said to me a couple of weeks ago he was running this networking event and asked me whether I'd speak, he talked a little bit about talking about how I got to the position I'm in at the moment. It certainly wasn't my expectation that I'd be running a program like this. I guess part of that is understanding the journey that you go on as you go through your career. I started off here. Does anyone know where that is? GHD guy might, right?
Newcastle.
Yeah, it is Newcastle. Newcastle was a lovely place to grow up back in the 70s or so. This photo is a bit more recent than that, but back in the 70s, all of this space was grass, and my grandmother actually lived on this street coincidentally. It's only the photo I could find at the time on short notice. But in Newcastle at the time, it was a fairly sleepy little town, and as you're growing up in the late 70s, wondering what you're going to do as a career, you could either become an internationally renowned surfer, which some people in Newcastle did, but being fair and red-haired, I didn't think that was going to be a long-term career, sitting out on waves out there. So there were other options in Newcastle. They looked a bit like this, which wasn't quite as attractive. Still in Newcastle, but at the time it was steelworks, digging coal out of the ground, and fairly heavy industry. Now, after I left Newcastle, that had changed, and if you visit Newcastle today, it's back pretty much more like the first photo, but there was a fairly restricted opportunity to go and do things. So I thought, well, no, I don't really want to do steelworks and digging coal out of the ground. So we thought that looked like a bit more fun. Now, Jim Wally last year gave the presentation. There were loads of pictures of those. That's a Mirage 3 from 77 Squadron. 77 Squadron's based at Williamtown out of Newcastle, and Newcastle has quite a strong focus on aerospace and the Air Force. So it wasn't a real surprise, I guess, that back in 1982 I joined the Air Force as an electronic engineer and went through, before ADFA came along, as an electronic engineer student at RMIT, and then an officer at various places through a 13 or 14 year career. And the Air Force is a fantastic way for people to get to understand defence industry, defence, travel the world, meet a bunch of good people, and have a real focus on doing particular things. So I'd recommend it to anyone who have kids growing up, still wondering will they do a gap year or will they go and do something else that might be a bit more substantial, and certainly the Air Force is a good way to blend both of them in. In the Air Force, it's more management than electronic engineering, I'd have to say, but after working with the guys out at the Flight Test Squadron here in Adelaide and Edinburgh, a few of us test pilots and flight test engineers decided to start a small company up. Couldn't find the logo of it to put in the slide, but it was a small company that we started off with 5 or 6 people and then grew to around 80 or so by about 1999. And in 1999, our company was bought by Raytheon, and I've been with Raytheon since then. So not a huge amount of change, I guess, in moving from company to company. But in that time, I've moved through different areas in engineering. I was the chief engineer for a while of a smaller company than it is today, and then moved into program management and then business management, general management, business development, and so on. So when I was managing the aerospace side of the company, I was here in Adelaide, coming from Sydney in the early 2000s. And as Chris will find out with anyone that stands too long in Adelaide, if there's a program the size of AWD at the time, or the new Hunter program, you stand still, you're going to get absorbed by that program. And pretty much everyone in Raytheon that was in Adelaide, and a fair number that were just in Australia, got absorbed into the Air Warfare Destroyer program. Now, my experience on ships at that point was zero, but it was more around program management and putting together the complexities of what is a pretty significant program. At the time, it was the largest defence program being executed in Australia and producing something. And it was a pretty exciting time when the decisions were being made back in 2006 and 2007. AWD started with the Defence White Paper in 2000 when it was understood that we needed an ability to project force, or at least take people, troops and other vehicles to areas which might help with civilian needs as well. And the LHDs, the landing helicopter docks, were ships that were seen as being able to transport 1,000 troops or trucks or tanks or other vehicles to places where they needed to be. But you don't want to have a ship that might have 1,000 people, troops, tanks and everything else in it, if it's in a threat situation. You need to protect those assets and all the people on board. So along with the decision to procure 2 LHDs came a decision to procure some new platforms to protect the LHDs, and that's the role of the Air Warfare Destroyer. The Air Warfare Destroyer is a true multi-role ship, as we'll see in a minute. It's not just to protect platforms from anti-air, it protects against other ships, submarines, and can project force onto land. So it's a true multi-role ship. Now, all the characters there in the photo were pivotal in making the decision back in 2006, and the government certainly had a different view to how it is taking on with defence acquisitions these days. Back in the day, there were a few large programs that hadn't gone particularly well, and the government was running a little bit gun shy and just wanted a fairly routine program at last to execute, not be in the press every day. So it had come up with a method of procuring large, complex programs, which was to have a look at what a new design that had all the bells and whistles might be, and have that spec'd up, and also have a look at what might be available off the shelf, more or less. And it surprised pretty much everyone involved, really, when the government went for what was the existing design at the time, which was an Avantia platform being built 5 times before. It was sailing around in various forms for Spain and Norway, and it represented low risk to the government and a fairly solid chance of being able to deliver a platform that met the Navy's requirements. So that decision was made back in 2007, and it involved a fairly unique contracting method, which was the AWD Alliance. Now, alliances have been used quite a bit in energy and resource sectors before, and they're mainly used for programs that don't really have high certainty on where they may get to. So I think the Commonwealth, and particularly DMO, or Defence Materiel Organisation, as it was at the time, understood that whilst we had an existing platform, we were Australianising that platform, throwing out the build-to-print idea to an extent, and putting our combat system on board. Now, the combat system is the component of the ship that turns the ship into a warship. It's the communications, the data links, the radar, and obviously the weapons, the guns and the missiles that make it such an effective platform, as well as sonar and decoys and electronic warfare and all sorts of other things. So the Navy has this tendency to muck around with the platforms and never take anything off the shelf. I guess it has followed a strong tradition of using US communications and equipment and weapons, and we just selected a European design for the platform, which, as you can understand, might be quite different to the way the US put ships together, and as it turned out, it is. The organisation that AWD Alliance is takes the best from the companies involved. The main companies are ASC AWD Shipbuilder, which is a subsidiary of ASC Pty Limited, and Raytheon Australia, which is a subsidiary of Raytheon Company, US defence company. CASG contracts Navantia directly for the design, and that design is provided to the Alliance as government furnished data. So the design comes to us as the Alliance. The Alliance is responsible for the management, the procurement, and producing the ships, and at the end of the day, delivering those back to CASG. The idea of the Alliance is to put the contract in the drawer and to take best for program decisions. So whilst Raytheon, for instance, pays my salary fortnightly, for which I'm very grateful, I'm seconded out of Raytheon for all the decisions I make on the program. I need to consider what's best for the program, what's going to get the best outcome at the cheapest cost and be most effective. Now that may or may not align with Raytheon's thinking, ASC's thinking, or the Commonwealth's thinking. We treat ourselves as a virtual company. We're not a legal entity, but we treat ourselves as a virtual organisation that is responsible, my role is being responsible to the customer, CASG, for delivering the capability. CASG then needs to sell that off to the Navy themselves. I'd have to say today, whilst we've obviously sailed through some choppy waters in the middle, the program's worked pretty well as meeting those goals. And one of the charters that our project board put up, which includes senior representation from the three main players, was that we would want to do continuous shipbuilding as a nation into the future. And I think in hindsight that was quite groundbreaking, considering where we were at that point in the program back in 2007, trying to ensure that the success of the program meant that we wanted to do this more, and in the end, that has been the result. Now, talking about the capability of the platform, this shows graphically a representation of what this platform can do. Hopefully you can see it up there with some of the little print, but it is a completely new generation capability from the combat system point of view. And it has been architected from the start, deliberately staying away from a lot of software change, but getting the latest generation of all the systems, equipment, and capability that will go with Aegis, which is the combat management system that knits this together. One of the other decisions we took was to ensure that we didn't gin around with the software behind Aegis. Aegis is in 100 platforms around the world, primarily US ones, but also with Japan, Norway, Spain, and a number of other countries. And as I'm sure you'll realise that if you start going a bit unique with the program, you might find that you're the only one trying to develop into the future. And it's a very expensive system to play around with. So we needed to find a way to interface into Aegis so that we could put our unique combat systems into Aegis, but not play with the software. So we came up with a method of doing that, which was to provide an interface between the unique systems and the existing systems already in play with the US Navy. And that has turned out to be very successful as well, because it meant that we could manage the selection of the systems ourselves. We would buy through the US Navy a number of other systems that came already with the capability of Aegis, and that allowed us to get the best of breed really for our combat management system and put this capability into it, which is specific to the needs of our Navy, not the US Navy. You'll see there that it has a range of small guns, larger guns, a 5-inch gun for projection of force on land. It has 48 cells for the SM-2 standard missile, anti-aircraft missile. The missile has a range of over 150 kilometres, fires at fast speeds. It also has the ability to hold evolved Sea Sparrow missiles, which is for closer in point defence for the ships and any other ships that she's sailing with. It has, as you've probably seen in the press in fairly recent times, the unique capability for the Australian Force, which is cooperative engagement capability. And that means that we can take information from other platforms, be they ships or aircraft, and use that aircraft to form our own tactical picture, and use that tactical picture to deploy weapons if we need to, or transmit that to other platforms. So it enables a relay, in effect, for this platform with other coalition forces that we may be sailing with and trying to protect. Yeah, if the technology works, we'll show you a bit about what this is all about. So to get from that, we started with this. This is what the shipyard looked like back in 2007. The shipyard bit is this, because that's the submarine facility. So submarine facility was there obviously from the 80s, but the shipyard facility, the new shipyard, needed to be built out of the sand and the dust really. So it took a little while for that to get designed, and there was some good input into how the flow of the production would work. It turned into that, which is a lot more impressive, a lot more useful. And this is the main area where the ships are built. This photo was taken around 2016. You can see 2 ships on the go at once. At one stage we had all 3 ships on the go, and it was a pretty busy place. But we had the advantage of a brand new shipyard, which at the time was one of the best shipyards in the world, because we do have space. We've got the flow worked out for how we wanted to move various blocks through the yard. We had a wharf here where, as John was saying, we could bring blocks in from Newcastle and Melbourne. Forjax and BAE Systems were making various blocks, keel blocks and upper blocks for the program. We barged those down from the other locations, and they'd be consolidated, we call consolidated, in the yard, which is slightly a bit more complicated than knitting. The accuracy of bringing those blocks together is quite a work of art, as you might imagine. They're 200-ton blocks, and they all need to make sure that the accuracy is very fine so that all the pipe work in those blocks actually connects. If you've done any work around the garden, you know that's pretty important to actually get the pipes connected. So there's a lot of work that goes on, and certainly in the early stages of the program, we spent a lot of time trying to work out better ways to produce the ships and make that stage of production a lot more efficient. So the new shipyard is in this area over here, and as John was saying, that's all sprung up out of the ground in the last year or so, and is very well progressed. They expect to be finished in March next year, and they're tracking along really well. So that will be exciting to see that new technology come into the shipyard. No good having a shipyard without having some talent, and as Chris and the team will find out, that's going to be a really tough part of the program to get through. And we found, certainly back in 2007, 8, 9, that it's a huge challenge getting the trained resource in country and in Adelaide to produce the ships to the quality that we needed. One of the reasons we wanted to distribute the work around the country is because we recognised that Adelaide just didn't have that resource back in the time. It's better now that we've got a program being AWD to jump off, and we've spent millions of dollars training all sorts of trades in what we need. But back in the day, we realised that a better answer was to distribute the work around the country. Welding, pipeys, electrical, quality, the whole 9 yards is a workforce that needs to be developed, and it's quite specific. And you're in competition with whatever else is happening in the country at the time. Back in the day, energy and resources was booming, so it was an interesting time. But the talented workforce that we've got will certainly serve very well for the future programs. That's a photo of the blocks coming over. They come sort of shrink wrapped from the various other places. And it does knock your schedule around a bit when there are storms going into Newcastle and the port, Forjax is on the river, prevents tugs getting in and barges getting out. So there's all sorts of things that can happen when blocks that size are on the water between Newcastle and Adelaide, as you might imagine. But that part of the program worked reasonably well, where we were able to distribute the work, as I was talking about, and maximise the Australian industry content for the program. And I'll talk a bit later about how we managed to get to a target of, we actually achieved 65%, we're currently at about 65% Australian industry content versus a target given to us by the Commonwealth of 50%. Noting that a lot of the equipment that is installed into an air warfare destroyer is not made in Australia. I think that's a pretty good result. And we have distributed a lot of work and not tried to vertically integrate the work into the main primes, because we do understand that it's important for the SMEs around the country to be able to access and be employed in programs of this size. So we did in 2007, 2008 have a fairly large networking program to get into sheet metal work, cabinet making, outfitting. Taylor Brothers is a company in Hobart that has done all the majority of the outfitting for all three ships to a high standard, and they're still doing it today. We've had some great take up from the SMEs around the program. It's been terrific to work with them. We've had over 2,500 people employed on the program at the peak. We've currently got around 700 or so, and we were at stages spending more than $600 million a year. So it's a lot of money, huge amount of procurement going on. See there, 2,800 odd suppliers from Australia and overseas, and some of those suppliers were developing product for us for the first time, which involves our engineers and our technicians going across to those companies, either around Australia or around the world, to make sure that they understand the specifications, we get what we need, and the product works when we need it to work. And I'm pleased to say that when we turned the combat system on for the first time, it fired up and did what it was supposed to do. Now, a lot of that was because we had test labs, we had test facilities in Sydney and in Adelaide. So we were able to trial the system, as well as some overseas facilities, trial the system in concert with the Aegis system, so that we had high confidence when it actually got on board the ship, when we turned it on, and when we brought in F-18 assets, as you saw on the video there, that was likely to work. For the engineers in the room that understand the design process, we had a pretty swift process to go through. We were contracted in October